Welcome to this evening's webinar, Maths in the Early Years Foundation Stage, What are the priorities for our youngest learners? Kindly being given to us by Sue Gifford this evening. Dr. Sue Gifford works as an early years mathematics consultant with various groups, including practitioners and official bodies, including DFE, NCTEM, and ACME. She has contributed to a range of guidance documents and online programs for early years practitioners. Previously a London reception teacher, she worked with pre-service teachers at Roehampton University and researched early years mathematics and children with mathematics difficulties. She's a past chair of the British Society for Research into the Learning of Mathematics and currently chairs the Early Childhood Maths Group. She has written and co-authored several books for teachers, including Teaching Mathematics 3 to 5, Developing Learning in the Foundation Stage, and The Power of Patterning in the Early Years. Her current research interests include the development of spatial reasoning and links between patterning and music. So, without any further ado, over to you, Sue, and welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, lovely to be here and to see so many people who are interested in early maths. Okay, I'm giving a personal view here about what are the priorities for our youngest learners. I think that early years practitioners recently have had an awful lot thrown at them. New curricula, new early learning goals and new guidance. So I'm looking at research. What do we know from research is what are the things that we should be focusing on? And this is my personal view from my view of research, that the answers are here. Spoiler alert. You've got Ben here. In his nursery, they got into number blocks and step squad 15. And they went into making staircases that went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see that that Ben here, he worked out that if he turned the bricks up the other way, he could make a staircase that is as tall as he is. And in the nursery, they realised that they had got 15 cable spools and they made this staircase outside. And what was so lovely about that was that the children walked round it. So the children on this side said, oh, I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And a child on the side said, I can see 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And a child around the other side could say, well, I'm not quite sure what they'd say. But isn't that a lovely discussion to have? And that demonstrates my mantra with early years maths is do it huge and outdoors. So what I want to start with is the idea that maths matters in the early years before children go to school. And what the research keeps showing is that those children who start behind stay behind. And so here's a sketch graph, but this seems to be what the research is suggesting, is that those children who before they start school have a very low knowledge of maths without foundation skills, they tend to not improve. They tend to stay at the bottom. And those children who start school with a good understanding of basic number and maths, that they improve and increase and the gap gets wider. The implications of that are that actually you've got to do something with children before they start school, at the start of school, because that is going to determine their lives, their outcome for school and for careers and for life. So the Early Intervention Foundation says children's understanding of number during preschool is consistently associated with their maths achievement in primary and secondary school. And that's an international finding. And so therefore, the ages of 3 to 5 are an ideal time, particularly to rectify income-related learning gaps in children's understanding of numbers. Those children who come into reception not knowing what comes after 3, we really have to focus on them. But interestingly, maths achievement is consistently found to be the strongest predictor of children's overall school achievement and their success in entering the workforce. It's not just number, it is maths. And that predicts children's outcomes more than language and social skills. And I'm sure my language colleagues will disagree with me. but we really do have to support early years practitioners and teachers, because they are the people who make a difference for those children who are at risk of underachieving. So what are the predictors? Parents' education and home learning, no-brainer. Self-belief. If children are put in the bottom group and told they're no good at maths, they will be no good at maths, and their teachers will believe they're no good at maths, and it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we have to believe that all children can learn maths and that we can teach all children to learn maths. Mathematical reasoning. Now this is research with 9 and 10-year-olds, but what they found was that, yeah, great if children know their tables and their number facts, but the children who could reason mathematically, who understood why 7/8 were 56, that they did better in the long run than just knowing their facts. And yes, we do want them to know their facts, but I think the implication of that is we need to start mathematical reasoning early on. And then in terms of what's the content of maths we need to focus on, interventions that focus on number sense have been found to be effective, but recently children's understanding of patterning is predicting their maths more than number, and their spatial reasoning. So I'm going to talk a bit about those. Now, the good news is that the statutory maths educational programme, this is the legal curriculum that we should follow, that Ofsted should be looking at, that endorses deep understanding of numbers to 10, relationships between numbers and patterns between the numbers, spatial reasoning skills, positive attitudes and interests, and looking for patterns and relationships. So those are what should be forming the early years maths curriculum. However, we have early learning goals, which we are told are not the curriculum. And in 2021, these changed. They moved out shape, space and measures and problem solving. And we have number and number patterns. Now, I just want to highlight to you that some of those number goals are wishful thinking. There is no research evidence. So, yes, great that children have a deep understanding of numbers to 10. And I think that is one of the core things. If they can start school with a deep understanding of numbers to 10, that is a priority. But for all 5-year-olds to know the composition of each number to 10, that isn't reasonable. Similarly, subitizing, being able to instantly see how many there are without counting, is great up to 4, but the research evidence isn't there that you can recognize 5 things in a line. And automatically recall number bonds up to 5. Nobody's even thought to research whether 4 and 5-year-olds can automatically recall number bonds. And I think the problem there is the automatic recall of number bonds, because what that tends to be interpreted by, and the latest evaluation of the EYFS has found this, as well as the pilot, that teachers interpret that as memorizing abstract number facts by heart, whereas that isn't what it should be about. But also, children need to understand what numbers to 5 mean before they can automatically recall number bonds for 5. And then the numerical patterns, verbally count beyond 20, great, and especially start at 20, because it's easier to start from 20, 21, 22. The teen numbers are really hard. But whether children will actually recognise the pattern of the counting system beyond 20, I'm not sure. Comparing sets of objects, I'm not quite sure why that is in numerical patterns. And then exploring and representing patterns within numbers up to 10, great. Understanding evens and odds, I think that's more for 6 and 7-year-olds. Now, a maths expert in the States looked at early learning goals and he described them as the good, the bad and the ugly. And I think you can see that there. I'm not sure why comparing numbers is in number patterns. I think they thought it would be nice to have a number patterns goal. But some of those things are not feasible as goals for all our 4 and 5-year-olds. Great for them to be working on it, but not as goals for everybody. So, number sense, I think of as a feeling for numbers, and the NCTM, they have identified it as cardinality and counting, comparison and composition. Counting involves knowing the number sequence, but also synchronizing saying one number for one object. That's quite a challenge for children. To memorize the number sequence is challenging for verbal memory. Synchronizing is hard for some children to do the coordination of the saying and the pointing. There's a lot of skills within that. And then there's the idea of cardinality, the meaning of the numbers, the 3-ness of 3 and the 8-ness of 8. There's comparison, the relative size of numbers and the order of numbers. And then the idea of composition, of numbers having little numbers hidden inside them, being made up of other numbers. There's quite a lot involved there. What the research says are the predictors for number, a key one is this idea of, can you give me 9? Can you give me 9 out of a whole tray of buttons? Not just count how many is in front of you, but actually stop at 9 in order to know that you've got a group of 9. It's that idea that the last number you say tells you how many there are. If children can do that, then they've understood the principle of counting and the cardinal principle. And in New Zealand, they made that their baseline assessment, which I think is a great baseline. You just say to children, can you get me 5 aprons? Can you get me 9 pencils? And the other thing that increasingly is coming up from the research is understanding of number symbols. Not just recognizing them, but knowing what order they come in and knowing the value of each one and being to link them with an amount, with a how many-ness. And so this idea that numbers are used in 2 ways, well, they're used in more than 2 ways, but essentially here we're talking about cardinal number, where the 3 there means how many is 3? 3 is that many bears. But we also use 3 as bear number 3, where 3 is just referring to one bear, and it's the bear that goes in between 2 and 4. And there we're asking, where does 3 go? So those are 2 very different ways that we use the numerals that are quite confusing for children, and children need to understand both of them. The cardinal 3, where it's an amount, and the ordinal 3, where it's a position. And that's not about saying first, second and third. That's about knowing that 3 goes in between 2 and 4 and it's nearer to 1 than it is to 10, which we might teach with the washing line mixed up and ordering the numbers. So a really important bit of number to focus on is counting. When we look at older children with maths difficulties, we find that actually they haven't got counting under their belts. They've been rushed on to addition and subtraction too fast. When you think that young children, around 2, they're starting to use number words, but 6-year-olds, if you get into year 1, you will find some children miss out 13 when they count to 20. That means it is taking them 4 years to learn to count to 20. Because there's a lot involved, I was saying, you've got to learn the number sequence, those teen numbers are really tricky, and you've got to learn about crossing the boundaries, and you've got to be able to coordinate what I like for the tagging, the saying and the pointing. You've got to understand the cardinal principle that the last number is how many. So those children who have started at 2 and are getting a lot of experience in counting are fine. But those children who come into reception not knowing what comes after 3, they have got to have a lot of experience to get to grips with all those skills and the understanding that is involved in counting. So I think that is one of our main focuses. And the research is saying that the way you teach cardinal counting is you go 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 buttons that you repeat how many things there are after you have counted them to get that cardinal principle across. But also, interestingly, children who can subitize 4, they can see that the last number tells them how many there are because they know that's 4. So actually teaching subitizing up to 4 helps children to understand the counting principle. So those are 2 important things to focus on. Subitizing, really important, and especially with fingers, because not only have you got the visual image, you've got the muscle memory as well. And that's what they found. Children who are 7 and 8 with maths difficulties are not able to show you 8 all at once fingers. They have to count them out, whereas we can work on that with younger children. And of course, if you can show 8 fingers, you've got that idea that 8's made up of 5 and 3, subliminally, in your muscle memory. So yes, fingers, dice outside, and little hiding and revealing games. And also Number Talks. If you don't know this website, the Number Talks Images website, it's a great one for looking and saying what you can see. And isn't that interesting? I wonder how many blueberries there were on there before the bites were taken out. But discussions about how do you see those numbers? What can you see? There's a very interesting project by Kath Gripton and Diana Paulich about making a counting library, and children in pairs choosing something to count out of the library, and it could be outdoors, it could be collections of pine cones and conkers and twigs, and how to count them. And what they find is counting into little containers helps slow children down and get that tagging. And then maybe counting in 2s or 3s and recording how they count. So that having counting lessons, counting sessions, giving children lots and lots of experience of counting so they get really confident with counting. The Early Childhood Maths group, they've been working on some quick and easy assessments for children, and we call those the CHIPS assessments, and one of them is this one, can you give the teddy 5 buttons? So have a look, there are lots of little videos. This is a great one, and the teacher says, can you give Teddy 5 buttons? You've got 7 there, and he says no, and that's how it is with assessing children, isn't it? Numerical patterns, I think what we are talking about with numerical patterns is basically making patterns and visual patterns. So the ideas of 6 being 3 and 3 on the dice, the staircase that shows you that each number is one more than the one before, and all those lovely patterns within 10. We do a lot with 10s frames, it seems to me, but do we show children that 10 is a triangular number? And do we show them that it's a flower, that it's 2 5s as well as 5 2s? Okay, and if you are looking at automatic recall and assessing that, then surely the way to assess that is whether children can apply it to problem solving. And this one, our favourite situations is 5 friends in the tent, 2 come out, how many are left in the tent? If children can say 3, then they know that number bond, because they're applying it to a meaningful context. And that one comes from work that I did with Rose Griffiths and Jenny Back, making numbers, where we were looking at manipulatives. And there is a lovely animation there that's on the Oxford Owl website for free. But you can easily do that with a folded bit of card. 5 go in, 1 comes out, how many is in the tent? Or harder, 5 go in, 3 come out, how many is in the tent? And link that to lovely book Maisie Goes Camping and story context like that. But that, to me, that's what automatic recall is about. It's not about what's 2 and 3. We've got the Development Matters, which is great. Birth to 5 Matters gives you a bit more detail as a resource, and there you have got comparison, counting, cardinality and composition, and lots of ideas within the learning trajectories of how you might support those different aspects. And how do you teach them? The pedagogy for number sense, I think, is playful, practical and outdoors. Meaningful context, and this is one that you probably know, where each child has got a voting block with their name on it, and they put the block against the book that they want at story time, and so the child there is counting and comparing. Looks like doing the animal Bob's going to win there, but something you can do every day. Routines that happen every day, like tidying up, snack time, register time, they give children that repeated experience that they need. And similarly with games, you do the same thing over and over again. Track games, but also collecting games, target games like Skittles, hiding and reveal games. Number rhymes, again, that you do every day, and picture books, lovely number picture books that link numerals and amounts. So putting labels on containers and checking that everything's there, having a checkpoint outside to check that you haven't lost any of the big trucks. Look at those boys counting there, really intent on that. Numeral dice as well as dotty dice, so that you read the number symbol and then decide what to do. And tracks outside that you can jump along. So you get that physical feeling of jumping along the numbers. And Skittles gives you the opportunity for scoring and recording how many are up and how many are down, and that idea of number composition as well as counting there. So number rhymes, I say, are important. They give children the music that helps them memorize the sequence, but we can also support with fingers and with number symbols. And I think perhaps we don't always link all of those together. And problem solving. So I want to shout out here for problem solving. And my favourite sort of problem are sharing problems. So this one, I'm sure you know, where the children share the biscuits between two, the doorbell rings, 2 more children come. You've got to share them again. Well, how are you going to do that? Are you going to put them all back together and start again from the beginning? Are you going to adjust? Are you going to take from some and give to the others? It's a genuine problem. And what we have found, we've been looking at how you teach fractions from 3 to 11, that those sharing experiences in nursery actually help older children understand fractions. The idea that the more people there are to share between, the smaller the fraction. And you can vary that with numbers. You use remainders. I love using remainders with young children, see what they do with the remainder. You can vary the context and the objects. If you've got jewels, you can't have fractions, but if you've got biscuits, you can cut them up. So sharing problems are really important as a way of challenging children, but also of encouraging them to represent their thinking in quite creative ways. I think young children show. Here's one where they're sharing 13 coins between 3 pirates. And the child has drawn the coins in speech bubbles. He's saying 4 coins each, that's why I've given them speech bubbles. The pirate without the hat isn't a pirate. I hope you're keeping up here. They've given the other coin to their friends. The number 13 is for all the coins. If you leave it up to the children to use the number symbols, you give them a repertoire of the signs and the numbers and you see what they use. That gives them confidence in using mathematical symbols in a meaningful way. And what they're doing problem solving in that way is they're demonstrating the characteristics of effective learning. They're playing and exploring. They're concentrating and keep on trying when they have difficulties, and they are creating and thinking critically, thinking of what's the best way of solving this problem. Those are very important life skills, and I like this point from the OECD. We don't know, these young children that we're teaching at the moment, what life will be like, what they will need to know in the future, but we think they will need the 4 C's: creativity, critical thinking, communication and collaboration, that they will get through those sort of problems. Right, just a little bit about patterning then. The research from Riddle Johnson was they found early patterning was a unique predictor of later maths over and above other maths and non-math skills. So this is really interesting. More than children's knowledge of number, their knowledge of patterning predicted their maths. And in a way, that makes sense, because some people describe maths as the science of patterns, that actually abstracting patterns, spotting relationships that keep coming again and again, generalizing those, that is the goal of maths learning. And what we're looking at with patterning is not just being able to go A, B, A, B, A, B, but to say what's the unit of repeat. So with a fruit kebab here, the unit of repeat is strawberry, banana, blueberry, blueberry, blueberry. With a little girl at the top, not quite sure what the unit of repeat is, whether it's stick, leaf, leaf, or stick, leaf. She hasn't quite got a consistent unit of repeat. So patterns are very interesting. I think we're hardwired to spot patterns, but it's harder to say what makes a pattern the pattern. I think you're saying, well, which bits are the same and what's the rule for how those are repeated. So here's a repeating pattern where the unit is red, yellow, blue, and Max has just spotted there's an error in that pattern. We also have growing patterns, or growing and shrinking patterns. We get the same shape getting bigger and bigger or smaller and smaller. And then we get spatial patterns where within the arrangement there is a segment that is repeated. So you might see that within the diamond there's a quarter that's rotated or reflected. and we talk about reflecting and rotating and radial symmetry. So what we are looking at from the research is repeating patterns, and we've got this book, The Power of Pattern, which is available from the Association of Teachers of Maths, where we've looked at what the progression is, and we think it starts with copying, continuing, creating, going beyond A-B, red, yellow patterns to more complex patterns. Can children spot errors? Can they fix errors? And can they, this is the holy grail, can they identify the unit of repeat? And then you can go further and look at continuous patterns, paper plate patterns that go on infinitely. And there you get into interesting questions like, what is the unit of repeat? Is it stick, button, cube, cube? Or is it button, cube, cube, stick? Or is it cube, stick, button, cube? And this is where the reasoning suddenly jacks up to year 6, I think. There's lots of scope for quite complex reasoning with pattern. You can have everybody doing the same basic activity, but working at different levels in terms of reasoning. So identifying the pattern unit, the best way we think for assessing that is to say, can you split these patterns into the parts that are the same? So here we've got AB, ABC and ABBC patterns, and we're looking at, can the children split those up into the little bits that are the same? And there's a wonderful example here. This is one of Bernie Westcott's children, who 4-year-old, who split up, this is an ABBA pattern into the bits that are the same, which I think is quite challenging for adults. You can look at that on Twitter. And again, we have now got some pattern chips assessments with little videos about assessing patterning on the Early Childhood Maths Group website, the Early Maths. So have a look at those and the videos. One of the interesting things about patterning is that children seem to be able to use letters to describe their pattern unit. So Sean made this pattern with the bears, and Simon said, you've made an ABBC pattern. And he said, so it could be dog, cat, cat, sheep. Well, we were flabbergasted by the level of generalising and abstracting there by a 4-year-old. But then we found that other children really like labelling their patterns as AB patterns or AAB patterns. And then we found some research from Fife et al. Which said that actually teaching 4-year-olds to use AB labels helps them to abstract and generalise the pattern structures. So this is a fascinating area, I think, and also a lot of fun, because you can get children symbolising action patterns. So here we've got some that go jump, jump, twirl, twirl, clap, clap, stamp, stamp, and they can invent their own symbols for action patterns. So patterning's important, and increasingly we think spatial reasoning is important, which is basically about teaching children to think spatially and to use that in maths. A good example of spatial reasoning, I think, is this sort of thing. So I might ask you, which of these will fold up into a square-based pyramid? Well, I don't know about you, I can easily see the bottom right one does, but I'm not sure about the others, and I have to get my polydron out to check. And if you can, have a think about which ones you think will, which ones won't. Why do you think some of them won't? And I suspect that you're saying, well, when you fold those up and then you fold those, they'll overlap or there'll be a gap. So I can kind of do the first fold up, but the second one I find really hard. But you can feel the reasoning there. You're saying, but you're not saying it. You're saying, if I do this, then that. That won't work because there's reasoning going on there, but it's happening in terms of visual images and manipulating images mentally. So what does spatial reasoning involve? It's basically about visualizing and predicting, but children need the practical experiences in order to be able to do that. It's about shapes and properties, so what we would focus on usually, but also it is about combining shapes, composing and decomposing. It's about construction, it's about cross sections. Spatial relations, positions and directions as we would think, but also transformations, rotation and symmetry, and navigation, finding your way around. And that also involves perspective taking and making models and maps and making 3D models from 2D photos and images and vice versa. So the research shows there's a really strong link. People who are good at spatial thinking tend to be good at maths. People who are good at maths tend to be good at spatial thinking. Not all of them, but there is a very, very strong link. This is very interesting, this graph, I think, because the children, they looked at high school students in the States, and the ones who are good at spatial thinking, and then they followed them up 11 years later to see what they were doing. The ones who had high spatial scores, they were in engineering, maths and computer sciences, physical science, but also visual arts and performing arts. The ones who were really, really bad at spatial thinking, look what they're doing, education. So I think I may not be alone in my difficulties with the spatial, with the polydrons. That implies that we in education may need some support in teaching spatial thinking and need to work on our own spatial thinking. So spatial thinking, we think, plays a fundamental role in how people think of maths, and we use spatial images like Ben there to show the staircase image of numbers being one more than the one before, graphs to show number relationships and the speeds of increase and decline, and this is one that we're familiar with from COVID. We did a lot of that. And as I say, we use spatial images to help children understand number relationships. And so spatial thinking, you're not just born with it, you can teach it. And so men and women, boys and girls, can improve their spatial thinking. That's the good news. And then that leads us to thinking, this I think is a fascinating idea. Optimizing spatial performance may be an underutilized route to improving maths. We may be missing a trick in not teaching children to think spatially, especially those children who are at risk of underachieving in maths. And maybe girls and other underrepresented groups are actually harmed in their progression in maths due to a lack of attention to spatial skills, to a lack of experience with the Lego and the spatial experiences. So what particular spatial skills predict maths? It's a lot of research around, can you imagine what happens when you rotate shapes, when you combine and position shapes, and not surprisingly, puzzle play and construction. And so I think what that means is we need to look at children's puzzle play and be challenging them to move on to the next level. And what we're doing there is we're focusing on the shape properties, what happens if you flip or you turn, and can you visualize before you do it? And so actually having that progression in puzzles and moving children on helps their spatial visualization. And I don't know if you have a look at the alphabet jigsaw video. I didn't know there were 4 different ways you could get M wrong in its space. And similarly with block play, are we not just saying that's a lovely construction, dear, but looking at, are we moving children on beyond trial and error to actually planning more complex constructions? And how do we do that? Story context, can you build a palace with a moat and a bridge that will go over the moat? And that structure's a challenge for children. And also this idea of, can you make a model from a photo that makes children focus in? And here's quite a hard one, 4 different views. Can you work out what is the model from that? So it's the sorts of things that you do anyway, the obstacle courses, the small world play, the bebots, the treasure hunts, models and the maps. And I think 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds maps are fascinating. And the Secret Birthday Messages is a book about treasure hunts if you don't know. How do we teach spatial reasoning? Starts off with body awareness, spatial awareness, large scale movement and toys, really important. Language and gesture, getting children to gesture when they're talking as well as us gesturing. And also things like more varied things to talk about, a wider range of language, goal-oriented activities where you're trying to copy things where you're focusing in closely, trying to make that model from the photo or draw the model, and encouraging visualization. So, sorry, I've talked a lot. Support. There's a lot of support in the spatial reasoning toolkit. We've got a learning trajectory that goes up to 6 and 7 that actually shows how you can move children on and gives lots of ideas for activities, with a spatial book list as well, and some lovely posters for how you might be teaching spatial reasoning in different situations in the classroom. And I just want to go back to Ofsted, all of those elements about child-initiated play and adult-initiated, physical environment, routines of the day, interests and dispositions, they are all part of the definition of teaching according to Ofsted. And the research is, it's about being playful, sustained shared thinking where you're interested in what the child is thinking and saying, guided play, a developmentally appropriate learning goal using a learning trajectory, so you know what the next step is. Child autonomy, so the child has some choice and control, but adult guidance in a sensitive way with modelling and playing and adapting to the individual. And I just want to end with this one. Most of us probably have a good idea what it takes to get our young children to love reading. Snuggling up with a favourite book at bedtime, for example, sends a clear message about the value of reading. But what about a love of maths? So my question is, when did you last have a warm and fuzzy maths time with a child? And maybe that means a puzzle, a game, or a book, I don't know. Anyway, here's some useful websites, including these lovely American ones, Ericsson and Dream, and those are the references and links.
Thank you so much, Sue. That was really, really interesting. Are there any questions for Sue? Number reversals, any tips, Sue?
I would say don't worry too much. I think you mean children writing numerals the wrong way around. They do that, and it usually gets sorted out when they're 5 or 6. But certainly, doing large scale numerals, chalk, painting on walls with those whitewash brushes and that sort of thing, doing it in the sand and demonstrating large. But I think it is something that most children sort out around about the age of 6. And I think the more important thing is, can they recognise the numeral, and can they link it to where it goes in the order, and can they link it to an amount?
If children are still struggling beyond 5 to 6, do you think it's worth emphasising spatial skills over other math skills at this point? Instinctively, I think yes, but perhaps the focus needs to shift as they get older. That's from Dr. Shepherd.
Emily Farron and colleagues, they're doing research with Lego with older children and looking at that, improving their spatial skills. Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think it's over and above. I think it's as well as, and I think it's using spatial representations and spatial thinking to help you understand number. Emily, do you want to come in there?
I think I agree with you, Sue, that it's really important to think about spatial skills, and we've shown that they're related to maths right through primary school and later. So yeah, I think it would be a good idea to emphasize spatial skills, but I don't think over math skills.
I mean, I think they are math skills, and there are some, I mean, I think there is evidence that if children have not got certain coordination, aspects of coordination sorted, they need more physical experiences in order to do that, and then that could be holding them back because they're having to focus on that rather than being able to focus on other things. But I think spatial training, the other thing is that it's enjoyable, isn't it? That you can focus on children's strengths. There may be children who can do that polydron puzzle much better than me at the age of 5, and the children who are really good at Lego, that you can celebrate those spatial talents that they have, and that can help have more positive attitudes towards maths and their own sense of their own ability and identity as a maths learner.
There's lots of thank yous here, and a brilliant and interesting talk with lots of good ideas, comments you'll be pleased to hear, Sue. Thanks, Sue and Emily. I'm watching the Lego research with interest, even in the secondary classroom where I teach. Students enjoy the spatial learning more than other topic skills, which is an interesting observation, even from a secondary perspective, I think.
Yeah, and there's lots of work done with engineering students, and secondary students about being able to visualize things in 3D, how they connect, how they move, cross sections, that are really quite hard spatial problems that are quite challenging, that are really worthwhile.
Also getting away from the idea that there's a strict sequence in this, that the kids learn in a set pathway, and because that isn't the case, obviously, from the observations that you've shared with us tonight.
We can identify learning trajectories, which are kind of average, but no child will ever follow that learning trajectory. They will all be different. And I think we are working on spatial learning trajectories that go through primary, but it depends on children's experience. Some children will not be starting in the same place.
And that whole maths matters in the early years, children who start behind stay behind, that's so powerful a message, isn't it? Mathematical ability predicts later achievement more than any other skill. Well, you can argue with it, but if that's what the research is telling us.
We want children to end up articulate, literate, with social skills and physical skills. But why not have maths as well? I don't think it has to be either or, but we can make such a difference. And I do think that is why early years teachers and practitioners need a lot more support and professional development than what they're getting at the moment. And that's what the school leaders need to be aware of.
We have another one here. The current cohort of Year 3 students are being highlighted as having more difficulties in maths than other years in some schools. Is there any research to back this up? This cohort will have missed out on play in nursery. Should these children be playing more to catch up rather than a more abstract approach to catch up?
The research on spatial reasoning is that it helps to have a spatial and practical approach to any new topic that you're learning about. So, and that goes back to Bruner. So it isn't either play or learning, but using manipulatives, using meaningful context, acting things out. A lot of science learning uses that. But those are approaches that we can use with older children as well to help to make it meaningful to them. And yes, then we want to move them on to visualizing, and we want to move them into symbolizing, but they may want to go to and fro between relating those to the drama and the manipulatives and the stories and the abstract alongside.
I guess that one was more about the impact COVID has had on that particular year group, but yeah, that applies anyway, doesn't it?
I think that is true. I think there's lots of impact of COVID in social skills and language and lots of ways, but not all children will have the same resources at home, and they won't have the same spatial play resources at home.
It only remains for me to thank you so much, Sue, for a really informative and interesting talk this evening, which people have obviously appreciated very much. So thanks ever so much, Sue.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for coming.